My name is Alex. I'm 32 years old, and my entire family deliberately abandoned me on my wedding day as part of a calculated plan to ruin me. Before I tell you how their world came crashing down just days later, do me a favor and let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. It's always good to know who's out there listening. Alright, let's get into the heart of it. The real beginning of the end wasn't the empty chairs at my wedding. It was a calculated act of desperation that took place 2 weeks before, on a gray Tuesday afternoon in Chicago. The city was bustling outside my office window, but inside, there was a focused calm. The low hum of our server bank was the heartbeat of my company, a sound I'd come to associate with progress and stability. We were on the verge of closing a landmark deal with a healthcare tech firm, a project that would secure our reputation and our future for the next 5 years. I was running on black coffee and the kind of deep, satisfying adrenaline that comes from seeing years of hard work pay off. My company, a bespoke software development firm I had started in my tiny apartment with nothing but a second-hand laptop and an idea, was my life's work. It was more than just code and contracts. It was the livelihood of 35 employees who trusted me, who depended on the decisions I made every single day. That comfortable hum was shattered by the crackle of my office intercom. It was my assistant, Sarah. Her voice was hesitant. "Alex, your father is here to see you. He doesn't have an appointment." I froze for a second, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. My father, Richard Wilson, never just dropped by. Phone call, maybe. A summons back to my hometown in Pennsylvania. Definitely. But a visit to my Chicago office? The place he derisively called my computer game factory? Something was wrong. Very wrong. "Send him in, Sarah," I said, my voice betraying none of the sudden anxiety twisting in my gut. He walked in, and my anxiety was immediately justified. He looked like a ship taking on water. His expensive suit, normally a symbol of his self-perceived status as the CEO of Wilson Innovations, was rumpled as if he'd slept in it. His face, usually florid and confident, was pale and drawn. He bypassed the usual pleasantries and sank into one of the plush leather chairs opposite my polished glass desk. A desk he'd once joked was too flashy for a kid playing with toys. "Alex," he began, his voice a dry rasp that barely carried across the room. "We have a problem. A serious one." I leaned back, consciously folding my hands on the desk to keep them from fidgeting. I had heard this opening line in various forms for the better part of a decade. My family's problems had an uncanny ability to become my financial responsibilities. It had been a slow, insidious creep. It started when I sold my first piece of software in college, a simple scheduling application for local businesses. The first request was for $500 to fix the transmission on my younger brother Michael's car. Then it was $1,000 for a new roof on their house because of a storm. As my income grew, so did the scale of their emergencies. It was a classic case of boiling a frog, a slow financial and emotional drain that I had allowed out of a deeply ingrained, misguided sense of familial duty. "What kind of problem is it this time, Dad?" I asked, my tone carefully neutral. He let out a long, theatrical sigh, a sound designed to elicit maximum sympathy. "Wilson Innovations is on the ropes," he said, staring at a point just past my shoulder. "The bank is calling in our loans. They're threatening to liquidate. We're on the verge of bankruptcy." Wilson Innovations, my father's pride and joy, a regional tech company that manufactured specialized hardware components, a relic of the late 90s that he ran like a feudal lord in his small Pennsylvania town. He refused to innovate, refused to adapt, and surrounded himself with yes-men. In his mind, his company, with its physical products and aging factory, was a real business. Mine, a thriving, agile firm on the cutting edge of software technology, was just a digital distraction. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, and the sentiment was genuine. Despite our history, I never wished for his failure. "Sorry doesn't pay the bills," he snapped, his desperation making him hostile. The mask of the weary patriarch slipped, revealing the angry, entitled man beneath. "I don't need your pocket change this time, Alex. I don't need you to cover a payroll. I need something real." He leaned forward and slid a thick, menacingly official folder across my desk. The logo of a major corporate bank was stamped on the front. "I need you to sign these." My hand trembled slightly as I opened the folder. The pages were dense with legal jargon, a forest of clauses and subclauses. But I didn't need a law degree to understand the brutal meaning. He wasn't just asking for money. He was demanding I sacrifice my own creation to save his. The documents were a personal guarantee, an agreement to sign over a significant, controlling portion of my company's shares as collateral. He wanted me to tie my success, my future, and the futures of my 35 employees to his sinking, mismanaged ship. It was a corporate anchor, and he wanted to chain it around my neck. This was no longer about helping family. This was about annihilation. I took a deep breath, the sterile, air-conditioned atmosphere of my office suddenly feeling suffocating. I read through the key paragraphs again, just to be sure. There it was, in black and white. The undersigned, Alex Wilson, does hereby pledge a 40% equity stake in Innovate Solutions LLC as security. 40%. Not a loan, not a gift. Pound of flesh. He was asking for a controlling interest in my life's work. Slowly, deliberately, I closed the folder. The soft click of the cardboard seemed to echo in the silent room. I slid it back across the gleaming surface of the desk, stopping it right in front of him. "No," I said. The word was quiet, almost a whisper, but it landed between us with the force of a physical blow. It was a word I had swallowed for 10 years, a word I had choked on out of guilt and a desperate, childish need for his approval. Saying it now felt both terrifying and liberating. My father stared at me, his mouth slightly agape. Disbelief warred with indignation in his eyes. He looked at me as if I'd just sprouted a second head. "No," he repeated, his voice dangerously soft. "What do you mean, no? Did you even read it? This is the family's legacy we're talking about. The Wilson name. Your grandfather would be turning in his grave." The mention of my grandfather, a man I respected, a man who had built his own small business with integrity, was a low blow. "My grandfather built his business on sound decisions, Dad. Not on handouts," I countered, my own voice hardening. "And Innovate Solutions is my legacy. It has my name on the door. I have 35 employees here, people like Sarah, out there at the front desk. She's a single mom. Her kids' college fund, her mortgage, her family's entire stability depends on this company remaining stable. I will not risk all of that, everything they have worked for, everything I have worked for, to bail you out of a situation you created through years of mismanagement." For a decade, I had said yes. Yes to the $20,000 for my sister Rebecca's soul-searching sabbatical in Europe after she graduated from Harvard. A trip from which she returned with an even more pronounced sense of superiority and a mountain of designer luggage. Yes to the substantial down payment on her husband Derek's first house, a house they now use to host fundraisers for his political campaigns. Yes, again and again, to the tens of thousands of dollars funneled to my brother Michael, the golden child, for his string of four spectacularly failed businesses. My parents had praised his entrepreneurial spirit, even as he burned through my money on projects like a custom sock delivery service and an artisanal pickle company. All of that support was framed as family helping family. But the help only ever flowed in one direction. The memory that truly cemented my resolve was sharp and bitter. Years ago, when I was just starting out, I had humbly asked my father for a small loan of $5,000 to buy a more powerful server. He had looked at my detailed business plan, laughed out loud, and tossed it back on my kitchen table. "You and your little computer games," he'd said, shaking his head with pity. "Don't be ridiculous. Get a real job, a steady salary. You'll thank me later." I didn't get a real job. I got a second and third job, lived on ramen noodles, and bought that server myself. I hadn't forgotten the sting of that dismissal. "After everything we've done for you," my father's voice dripped with sanctimonious venom. "After the upbringing we gave you, the opportunities, you choose a handful of strangers over your own blood. Everything you've done for me?" The question screamed in my mind. "You mean the constant criticism? The endless comparisons to Michael? The belittling of every success I ever achieved on my own?" He saw the resolve in my face. The disbelief curdled into pure fury. He stood up so abruptly that his leather chair scraped loudly against the polished concrete floor. He was the king whose decree had just been defied by a peasant. He walked to the door, his hand gripping the cold, steel handle. He paused and turned back, his face a mask of cold, reptilian rage. There was no father in his eyes, only an enemy. "You've made your choice, Alex," he said, the words hanging in the air like a formal declaration of war. "You will regret this." He walked out, slamming the door hard enough to make the glass wall beside it shudder. I sat there in the ringing silence, the aftershock of his words vibrating in the air. I didn't know then what form that regret would take. I didn't know the depths of his cruelty. I just knew that I had finally, after a lifetime of appeasement, drawn a line in the sand. I had no idea they were planning to turn that line into a war zone, with my wedding as ground zero. The day of my wedding was, by all objective measures, perfect. It was a crisp, perfect day in late September. Emma and I had poured our hearts, and a significant amount of money, into this day. The Embers, our chosen venue, was a beautifully restored historic building just outside of Chicago. All exposed brick, soaring ceilings, and elegant arched windows. Sunlight streamed in, making the dust motes dance in the air and illuminating the stunning floral arrangements that smelled of lilies and eucalyptus. The low murmur of our 150 guests filled the space with warmth and life. They were our friends, our colleagues, the people who had supported us. They were our chosen family. And then there was the family I was born into. As I stood at the altar, waiting for Emma, my eyes kept being drawn to the front row on my side. It was a block of 8 empty seats. A stark, gaping hole in the otherwise joyful tapestry of our celebration. My parents, Richard and Linda, my brother, Michael, my sister, Rebecca, and her smug husband, Derek. Even my aunt, uncle, and cousins from my father's side, people who had always sent Christmas cards, were nowhere to be seen. Leo, my best man and the closest thing I had to a brother, stood beside me. He leaned in, his own smile tight with concern. "Still nothing?" he whispered. "Not a word," I whispered back, my throat suddenly dry. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. My father hadn't spoken to me since that explosive confrontation in my office. The silence had been unsettling. But then, a few days ago, my mother had called. Her voice had been syrupy sweet, dripping with a false enthusiasm that, in retrospect, should have been a massive red flag. "We're so excited, Alex. We're all coming. And your father has a special surprise planned for the reception. He said it's time for the family to finally come together and celebrate you properly." Now, standing in front of everyone, that surprise felt less like a gift and more like a threat. What was this? Some kind of twisted power play? Were they all sitting in a limo just outside, waiting for the ceremony to start before making a grand, dramatic, attention-stealing entrance? The thought was so deeply, pathologically typical of them that it was almost believable. They couldn't stand it when the spotlight was on me. Then the music swelled, the great oak doors at the back of the hall swung open, and I saw Emma. Everything else faded away. My breath caught in my chest. She was radiant, a vision in white, her smile so genuine and full of love that it felt like a shield. As she walked down the aisle, her eyes locked on mine, and for those few precious moments, the empty chairs ceased to exist. All the tension, the anxiety, the years of family drama, it all melted away under the warmth of her gaze. She reached my side, her hand found mine, and its reassuring warmth grounded me. Her smile was the only thing that mattered. We got through the ceremony. Our vows were real and true, promises we made to each other that felt like the only solid things in a world that had suddenly tilted on its axis. When the officiant pronounced us husband and wife, the applause was thunderous. As we walked back down the aisle, smiling through a haze of joy and relief, the sight of those empty chairs hit me again. It was a public statement, a deliberate, humiliating wound inflicted in front of everyone I knew and respected. The cocktail hour was a new kind of torture. Friends and business associates, people whose respect I valued, came up to congratulate us. They were trying to be polite, but the questions were unavoidable, laced with a pity I could feel like a physical touch. "Congratulations, Alex. Your parents must be so proud. Are they running late?" asked an older business associate. "Just a slight delay," I mumbled, the lie feeling like sandpaper in my mouth. "A small family emergency." My sister Rebecca's best friend from college, a woman I'd known for years, cornered me by the bar. "Alex, where is everyone?" Becca was so excited about her dress. Her cheerful obliviousness was like a knife twisting in the wound. Emma, bless her soul, was my champion. She was a fortress of grace and strength, deflecting questions with a charming smile and a clever turn of phrase. "Oh, you know the Wilsons," she'd say with a light laugh. "Always making an entrance. We're just saving them a seat." Her hand was a constant, reassuring pressure on the small of my back, a silent message. "I'm here. We're in this together." But as the minutes ticked by and the cocktail hour bled into the reception dinner, the dread hardened into a sickening certainty. This wasn't a delay. This wasn't a poorly timed joke. This was intentional. This was the regret my father had promised me. This was an execution, and I was the one on the chopping block. Just as the catering staff began to serve the main course, I saw Maria Gonzalez, the venue manager, weaving her way through the tables toward us. Maria was the epitome of a professional, a calm and capable woman who had handled every detail of our event flawlessly. But as she approached our head table, I saw a flicker of something in her eyes that didn't belong at a wedding reception. It was a deep, uncomfortable pity. "Mr. Wilson," she said, her voice a discreet murmur meant only for me and Emma. "I am so sorry to interrupt. Courier just dropped this off. He was given very specific instructions to deliver it to you personally at precisely this time." She handed me a single, crisp white envelope. It was heavy, made of expensive cardstock. My name, Alex, was written on the front in my mother's elegant, looping cursive, a script I had seen on a lifetime of birthday cards and hollow apologies. My heart, which had been hammering with anxiety all day, suddenly felt like it was beating in slow motion. This was it. The explanation. The apology. The reason. With trembling fingers, I tore open the seal. Inside was one of our own wedding cards, the beautiful one with the embossed silver leaves that Emma had spent weeks picking out. But the pre-printed congratulations had been crossed out. Below it, scrawled in my father's aggressive, slanted handwriting, were 7 words. 7 words that burned themselves onto my brain like a branding iron. "Let's see how the failure gets embarrassed without his family." The world tilted. The air rushed out of my lungs as if I'd been punched in the gut. The sounds of the reception, the soft jazz music, the gentle clinking of silverware, the murmur of happy conversation, receded into a distant, muffled roar, like I was underwater. I read the words again and then a third time. My mind simply couldn't or wouldn't process the sheer, unadulterated cruelty of it. Failure. After all my work, after building a successful company from scratch, after supporting them for a decade. That's still all I was to him. To all of them. A failure to be publicly shamed. Emma saw my face drain of all color. "Alex? Honey, what is it?" She gently took the card from my numb, nerveless fingers. Her gasp was sharp and visceral, a sound of pure, uncomprehending shock. Her eyes blazed with a protective fury that was almost terrifying. "I don't understand," I whispered, shaking my head slowly from side to side, as if I could physically negate the reality of the words on the card. "Why? Why would they do this?" Maria cleared her throat, her professional demeanor cracking to reveal a woman genuinely outraged on our behalf. "Mr. Wilson, Alex," she said, her voice firm now, "I think you need to know something." I wasn't going to say anything because I couldn't believe anyone would be so malicious. But now, she motioned for us to follow her, leading us to a small, quiet alcove behind a curtain, away from the prying eyes of our guests. "Your father and your brother-in-law, Mr. Palmer, were here 2 weeks ago," she began, her words coming out in a rush. "They were here to confirm the seating chart," they said. I was in the adjoining office, and the door was open. I overheard their entire conversation. I am so sorry. I truly thought it must be some kind of sick, tasteless joke. What did you hear? Emma demanded, her voice trembling, not with sadness, but with white-hot rage. Maria took a deep breath, her eyes meeting mine with profound sympathy. Your father was talking to Mr. Palmer. He was laughing. He said, and I remember this very clearly because it was so shocking. He'll be standing there like a complete idiot. All his fancy new Chicago friends will see that he's nothing without his family. He'll be so humiliated, he'll have to come crawling back to us. That's how we get the signature on those papers. Your brother-in-law, the politician, he said it was a brilliant hostile negotiation tactic. Hostile negotiation tactic. The cold, corporate phrase echoed the brutal logic of my father's world. This wasn't an act of petty spite. This wasn't a simple family squabble that had gotten out of hand. This was a calculated, strategic assault. They were weaponizing my wedding, my love for Emma, my public reputation, everything I held dear, to try and extort me, to force me to sign over my company. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place, and the image it formed was grotesque and monstrous. Just as this horrifying realization washed over me, my phone, which I'd set to vibrate, buzzed insistently in my pocket. I pulled it out, expecting another hateful text. But it was a notification from my smart home security system at the Lake Michigan house. The house I'd bought as a sanctuary. The house I had once, in a moment of profound foolishness, told my family to treat as their own. The notification wasn't a motion sensor alarm. It was an alert I had set up myself for an unusual circumstance. A feature I never thought I'd actually need. Activity detected. High decibel audio levels consistent with a party. Multiple voices detected in living room area. Leo, who had seen us slip away and had followed us with a concerned look, saw the message over my shoulder. His eyes went wide with disbelief. No, they wouldn't, he breathed. He pulled out his own phone, his fingers flying across the screen. He was checking social media. His face went pale. Alex, he said, his voice barely a whisper. His hand was shaking as he turned his phone toward me. Oh man, you need to see this. My brother, Michael, was on the screen. He was grinning inanely into his phone's camera. He was live streaming, and he was doing it from inside my house. I have expanded the first two parts of the story, adding more detail, internal monologue, and dialogue to increase the word count and emotional depth, as requested. I will now continue this process for the remaining parts of the story to build a complete narrative that meets the minimum 10,000 word requirement. I will proceed with writing the rest of the story in the same expansive style. The image on Leo's phone was a surreal, sickening tableau of betrayal. It wasn't just a live stream, it was a victory party. My entire family, all 8 of them, were there, sprawled across my cream-colored sofas in the living room of my lake house. The room was a sanctuary I had designed myself, a place of clean lines, calm colors, and wide windows looking out over the water. They had violated it, turned it into a stage for their cruelty. They were laughing, holding up glasses filled with my best bourbon, the expensive stuff I saved for special occasions. This was supposed to be a special occasion. My father, Richard, was there, leaning back with a smug, satisfied grin on his face, looking nothing like the desperate, rumpled man who had pleaded for my help in my office. He looked like a king surveying his newly conquered territory. My mother, Linda, was ostentatiously showing off a new diamond bracelet to my sister, Rebecca, who was admiring it with a look of smug satisfaction. And Michael was the gleeful master of ceremonies for this grotesque spectacle. He held his phone up, a wide, boozy grin plastered across his face, as he addressed his audience of a few hundred anonymous strangers. And a big shout-out to my big brother, Alex, he slurred, raising his glass in a mock toast that sent a wave of fresh nausea through me. He thinks he's too good for us now. Thinks his little computer company in the big city makes him a big shot. Well, I ask you, he gestured dramatically around my living room, who's living the high life now? He's probably standing there all alone, trying to explain to his rich new friends why his own family bailed on him. Talk about embarrassing. Cheers to that. They all roared with laughter and raised their glasses. Cheers. A tinny, distorted chorus of contempt and betrayal, broadcast for the world to see. It was a public stoning, a digital age pillory, and they were using my life, my home, my reputation as the rocks. A strange thing happened in that moment. The deep, agonizing wound of being abandoned on my wedding day didn't disappear, but it was instantly cauterized by a different emotion. An anger so cold, so sharp, so utterly clear, it felt like a shard of ice forming in my chest. The grief was still there, a gaping chasm. But now, it was illuminated by the cold, bright light of pure, clarifying rage. This wasn't just a family dispute anymore. This was a security breach. Emma saw the transformation in my eyes. She saw the hurt recede and the steel replace it. She immediately went into action. She was magnificent. "Leo," she said, her voice low but crackling with authority. "Go back out to the reception. Find the DJ. Tell him we're moving up the toasts and the dancing. Get on the microphone, say we were called away for a brief, urgent matter but that we insist the party continues. Keep everyone happy. We are not letting them win. We are not giving them the satisfaction of ruining this day." Leo nodded, his face grim, and hurried off to perform damage control. Emma turned to me, her beautiful face a mask of furious determination. She took my hands in hers. "Alex," she said, her voice fierce. "Breathe. We will handle this. But not now. Tonight we have 150 friends out there who love us. We will go out there, we will cut our cake, we will have our first dance, and we will smile. We will show them, and everyone else, that we are unbreakable. Their poison stops right here. It does not get to touch this moment." She was right. I took a deep, shuddering breath. "Okay," I said, my voice hoarse. "Okay." We walked back into the reception hall hand in hand, forcing smiles onto our faces. The next hour was an out-of-body experience. We danced. We cut the cake. We listened to Leo and my maid of honor give beautiful, heartfelt speeches that carefully avoided any mention of my family. I felt like an actor on a stage, playing the part of the happy groom. But beneath the surface, my mind was already working. A different part of my brain, the logical, problem-solving part, was taking over. Later that night, after the last guest had departed, we found ourselves in a taxi, heading not to a honeymoon suite, but back to our apartment. The adrenaline had worn off, leaving a heavy, exhausted silence. When we got inside, I didn't take off my tuxedo. I walked straight to my home office. "What are you doing?" Emma asked, her voice soft with concern. "I'm building a wall," I said, sitting down at my desk and firing up my computer. A firewall. My fingers flew across the keyboard. I wasn't the grieving son or the humiliated groom anymore. I was a software architect. My world was one of logic, of systems, of encryption and secure protocols. And my family had just become a hostile entity, a virus that needed to be quarantined and eradicated. First, email. All personal and business accounts. Passwords changed to long, complex, randomly generated strings. Recovery phones and emails switched to Emma's. Two-factor authentication enabled on every single account, using a new, dedicated hardware key. Next, all financial institutions. Bank accounts, investment portfolios, credit cards. New passwords, new security questions, new PINs. I logged into my primary credit card account and saw the list of authorized users. Richard Wilson, Linda Wilson. With 2 clicks, their names were gone. Their access was terminated. I saw the pending charge from a high-end jewelry store for my mother's new bracelet, the one she'd been showing off in the live stream. Without a moment's hesitation, I clicked the button, "Report this charge as fraudulent." Then the house, their stage. I accessed the smart home's administrative panel. I could see the system logs. They were still there, the music still playing. With a cold, methodical precision, I began to dismantle their access. All existing digital keys and guest passes were revoked. The master administrative password was changed. I remotely wiped the access history. And then, with a final, satisfying click, I triggered the system's highest security setting, Emergency lockdown. It was a feature designed for break-ins. It locked every electronic door and window, disabled all local keypad and remote access. And, as a bonus, it would start blaring a piercing alarm in 60 minutes if the property wasn't vacated. They were in, but they were about to be very rudely kicked out. Each click was another brick in the wall. A digital fortress I was building around my life. A fortress they would never, ever breach again. That night, there was no sleep. The hotel suite we had booked for our wedding night felt cold and impersonal. A silent testament to a celebration that had been stolen from us. Emma, emotionally and physically drained from holding us both together for the entire day, had finally drifted off into an exhausted sleep in the king-sized bed. But I couldn't rest. The white-hot rage had cooled, solidifying into a heavy, dense core of resolve in my gut. My mind was buzzing, whirring like a processor running a complex calculation. I sat in the dark, the glow of my laptop screen casting long shadows on the walls. I opened a file I hadn't dared to look at in years. It was a simple Excel spreadsheet, a file I had named family_expenses.xlsx. I had created it about 5 years ago in a moment of frustration, a half-hearted attempt to get a handle on the constant, unending flow of money out of my accounts and into theirs. I had abandoned it after only a few months because looking at the numbers, seeing the reality of the situation quantified in stark black and white, had been too painful, too shaming. Felt like admitting my own weakness. Tonight, that spreadsheet didn't feel like a source of shame. Felt like a weapon, a tool of clarification, path to the truth. I started from the beginning, determined to miss nothing. I logged into my oldest archived bank portals, delving into statements from a decade ago. I meticulously combed through years of credit card histories, the digital paper trail of my own long-term exploitation. The work was methodical, painstaking, and with each line item I entered, another layer of my denial was stripped away. Each entry was a small, distinct scar. October 2012, $1,250.78. University of Pennsylvania. Tuition payment for one of Michael's entrepreneurial seminars. I remembered that one. He'd promised it was the key to his success. He dropped out after 2 weeks. June 2014, $2,500. The Grand Colonial Hall. The deposit for my sister Rebecca's wedding venue. The irony was a physical blow, so bitter it made my throat ache. Monthly recurring charge, 2015 to 2018, $850. Oak Ridge Country Club. My father's membership dues, an expense he had always claimed was absolutely critical for business networking, though the only thing he ever seemed to bring back from it was a golf tan and a sense of entitlement. January 2016, $2,180. Nordstrom. Another one of my mother's credit card bills paid in full. I remembered her call about it. She'd claimed she needed a few new things for a charity gala, but the statement was filled with charges for designer handbags and shoes. She hadn't even attended the gala. On and on it went, a relentless chronicle of their demands and my acquiescence. Car payments for Michael. Property taxes on their sprawling house. Down payments. Vet bills for their purebred dogs. Seed money for Michael's laughably absurd ventures. The custom sock delivery service. The artisanal pickle company. The mobile app that was supposed to be the Uber for dog walkers. All of it went up in the smoke of his incompetence. And every time, I was the one who paid for the fire extinguisher. I found the wire transfer for $75,000 I'd sent directly to my father's company account 3 years ago. The memo line read, "Emergency payroll loan." He had called me in a panic, claiming he couldn't pay his employees and that Wilson Innovations would collapse without my immediate help. A week after I sent the money, my mother had posted a gushing album of photos on social media from their surprise 2-week luxury cruise through the Greek Isles. The lie was so blatant, so breathtakingly insulting. At the time, I had forced myself to believe his explanation that the cruise had been booked months in advance. Tonight, I saw it for what it was, blatant, unapologetic theft. For hours, I typed, the clicking of the keys the only sound in the dark room. Each entry was a confirmation of my own foolishness, a testament to my desperate, pathetic need for an approval that was never going to come. I had been funding their lifestyle, their delusions, and their deep-seated contempt for me. I wasn't their son. I was their personal, no-limit ATM. I was their walking, talking inheritance, an asset they didn't have to wait for me to die to liquidate. Finally, sometime around 4 a.m., I was done. I navigated to the bottom of the final column. My hand was shaking as I highlighted the cells and hit the auto-sum function. The number that flashed onto the screen seemed to burn with a cold, blue light. $457,219.34. Almost $500,000. I leaned back in my chair, the breath leaving my body in a long, ragged sigh. I stared at the number, not with pride or anger, but with a profound, soul-crushing sadness. It was the price tag of my hope. It was the cost of a fantasy. The fantasy that one day, if I was just generous enough, just successful enough, just good enough, they would finally see me, respect me, maybe even love me. That fantasy died on my wedding day. It was murdered by a 7-word note on a wedding card. And looking at that number on the screen, that cold, hard, indisputable number, I knew what I had to do next. This wasn't just about cutting them off anymore. This was about justice. This spreadsheet wasn't just a record of my pain. It was a declaration of independence. And it was going to be the cornerstone of my new life. I have now completed the expanded version for parts 1, 2, and 3, bringing the story to approximately 5,000 words. I will continue writing the remaining parts with the same level of detail and expansion to meet the final word count requirement. The first 3 days after the wedding were defined by a heavy, unnerving silence. It was the calm before a storm I knew was coming. I spent that time in a blur of activity, forwarding every piece of evidence to a secure cloud server. Screenshots of the live stream, a high-resolution photo of the hateful wedding card, the audio file from my home security system, and the now complete spreadsheet of financial exploitation. I imagined my family arriving back at the lake house after a day out, finding the key codes no longer worked. I pictured their confusion morphing into indignation, and then into raw panic as their calls to me went straight to a newly configured voicemail message. You have reached a number that is no longer in service for you. The thought gave me a grim, hollow sense of satisfaction. On the 4th morning, the dam of their arrogance finally broke. My phone, which I had set to forward all their numbers to a specific logging app, began to blow up. The log showed 35 missed calls in the span of a single hour. Then came the barrage of text messages, a digital tidal wave of entitlement and rage. The first ones were from my mother, Linda, a perfect encapsulation of her self-absorbed worldview. Alex, what in the world is going on? My Amex was just declined at the grocery store. In front of everyone. It was mortifying. You need to call me and fix this immediately. A few minutes later, the bank just called Richard about the mortgage payment. They used the word delinquent. Did you forget to pay it? You know how your father worries. And finally, this is not funny, Alexander. You are upsetting your father. Whatever point you think you're making, you've made it. Now turn our cards back on. Then came the texts from my father, each one more aggressive and commanding than the last. He didn't ask, he ordered. Pick up the phone. We need to talk. Now. Your childish little stunt has gone on long enough. You will reinstate my authorized user status on your credit account immediately. I have business expenses. I need that $250,000 for the quarterly payroll. We had a deal. You owe it to this family, to my company, to see us through this. Michael's were a pathetic mix of whining and impotent threats. The voice of a spoiled child whose favorite toy had been taken away. Dude, what the hell? I'm locked out of the lake house. We had plans for the whole week. All my stuff is in there. You can't just cut me off. We're family. You promised you'd always help me with my businesses. I'm telling Dad to call his lawyer. You're not going to get away with this. I didn't respond to a single one. I simply screenshotted every message, cataloged every logged call, and added them to the growing mountain of evidence. But I knew this was just the opening salvo. Texts and angry calls were amateur hour. The real attack, the one designed to do real damage, came from the one person in my family who truly knew how to play dirty. my brother-in-law, the Honorable Derek Palmer. Derek was a slick, ruthlessly ambitious local politician whose entire career was a carefully constructed facade of family values and community leadership. A messy, public scandal involving his wife's family was a direct threat to his ambition, and he reacted like a cornered snake. A week after the wedding, the first shots were fired in his real war. A handful of anonymous, one-star reviews appeared on my company's public profiles on Google and Glassdoor. They were cleverly worded, using corporate jargon to sound credible. Unethical billing practices. Chaotic project management. A culture of broken promises. Then it escalated. A formal-looking email, sent from a disguised, anonymous address, landed in the inbox of the vice president of procurement at my biggest client, the healthcare corporation whose contract we were about to sign. The email was a masterpiece of insinuation. It didn't make any direct accusations. It simply raised concerns, suggesting that my company, Innovate Solutions, was the subject of an internal investigation regarding a significant data security breach, and that we were actively trying to conceal the matter from our clients. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. My contact at the company, a man named Bob who I'd golfed with, called me that afternoon. His voice, usually warm and friendly, was strained and formal. "Alex," he said, and I could hear the unease in his tone. "We received a disturbing email this morning. I'm sure it's nothing, but our compliance department has to treat any mention of a data breach with the utmost seriousness. We have to put the new contract on hold, pending the results of a full, independent security audit of your systems. It's just procedure. Procedure that would cost my company $250,000 in immediate revenue and potentially jeopardize the entire relationship." It was a precision strike, aimed right at my financial jugular. It was designed to cripple me, to make me bleed, to force me back to the negotiating table with my family, beaten and desperate. The pressure was immense. The rumors started to circulate. My employees, my loyal team, started to exchange worried glances. My stress levels were through the roof. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford. Emma was my rock, constantly reminding me that this was the desperate act of desperate people. But I knew, with a chilling certainty, that I couldn't fight this alone. They had declared all-out war. It was time to bring in a general. My company's lawyer, a good and decent man named Frank, was great with contracts, mergers, and intellectual property law. He was a builder, but this wasn't a construction project. This was a demolition. This was a street fight, and Frank, with his gentle demeanor and love of legal precedent, was not a street fighter. I needed someone who wasn't afraid to get their hands dirty. I needed a warrior. Leo, my best man, was the one who gave me the name. We were sitting in a quiet, dark bar, the kind of place you go to when the world feels too loud. I had just laid out the whole situation for him, the smear campaign, the client putting the contract on hold. He took a long sip of his beer and set the glass down with a thud. "You're trying to play chess with people who are just knocking the pieces off the board," he said. "You need to stop playing their game. You need a lawyer who flips the whole table over." He leaned forward. "There's this woman, Diana Albright. My old boss, a guy who ran a hedge fund, had to deal with a hostile takeover attempt from a rival firm. They were trying to ruin him. He said hiring Diana was like unleashing a velociraptor in a bespoke suit. She doesn't just win. She systematically dismantles the opposition until they have nothing left to fight with." The description was so vivid, so potent, it stuck with me all night. A velociraptor in a suit. That's exactly what I needed. The next morning, I called her office. Her assistant informed me that Ms. Albright's schedule was booked for the next 3 months, but I mentioned my friend's hedge fund boss, and a consultation slot miraculously opened up for that very afternoon. Diana Albright's office wasn't the dusty, book-lined chamber I had imagined. It was a stunning, minimalist space on the 50th floor of a downtown skyscraper, with a panoramic view of the Chicago skyline and Lake Michigan. The art on the walls was modern and aggressive. She sat behind a large, empty glass desk, a single laptop her only tool. She was in her early 50s, with sharp, startlingly intelligent eyes that seemed to analyze, categorize, and dismiss you all in the span of a single heartbeat. She didn't waste time on small talk. You have 30 minutes to convince me that your case is more interesting than the multimillion-dollar intellectual property dispute I have waiting, she said, her voice crisp and clear. She gestured for me to sit. I took a deep breath and I laid it all out. The 10 years of systematic financial support. The final, desperate demand to sign over my company shares. The calculated abandonment at my wedding. The hateful card. The gloating live stream. The professional smear campaign led by my politician brother-in-law. The client who had just put our biggest contract on hold. I finished by opening my laptop, turning it to face her, and showing her the spreadsheet. The final, damning number, $457,219.34. She listened without a single interruption, her expression unreadable, her focus absolute. She leaned forward and scrolled through the spreadsheet, her eyes moving with terrifying speed over the line items, the dates, the amounts. She read the text messages I had screenshotted. She watched a 30-second clip of the live stream. When I was finally done, a heavy silence filled the room. She leaned back in her chair, her fingers steepling under her chin. "They are sloppy," she said finally, her first comment on the entire sordid situation. "Their greed has made them arrogant, and their arrogance has made them sloppy. That's a dangerous combination for them. A very, very good one for us." She looked me straight in the eye, her gaze piercing. "Let me be clear, Mr. Wilson. I am not a family therapist. I don't mediate disputes. I litigate. I win. So tell me, what is your desired outcome?" I didn't have to think about it. The answer was forged in the fire of my wedding day. "I want them out of my life," I said, the words coming out with a force that surprised even me. "Permanently. I want to protect my company from their attacks. And I want to ensure, legally and financially, that they can never do this to anyone, including themselves, ever again." A slow, thin, predatory smile spread across Diana's face. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the smile of a hunter that has just spotted a clear, unambiguous target. "Then your desired outcome is not only achievable, it is likely," she said. "My retainer is $20,000. I suggest you pay it by the end of the day. We have a lot of work to do. We are going to stop defending, Mr. Wilson. We are going to start attacking." Walking out of her office and into the bustling Chicago streets, I felt a sliver of hope for the first time in weeks. I wasn't just a victim anymore. I wasn't alone in this fight. I had just hired a general for my war. That evening, I was in my home office, initiating the wire transfer for Diana's substantial retainer. It was a lot of money, but it felt like the best investment I had ever made. As I was about to hit confirm, my phone rang. It was an unknown number with a Pennsylvania area code. My first instinct, now conditioned by weeks of harassment, was to ignore it. But something, a gut feeling perhaps, told me to answer. "Hello," I said, my voice cautious. "Alex? It's your Uncle James." The sound of his voice was a surprise. Uncle James was my father's younger, quieter brother. He was a high school history teacher, a man who seemed to live in a different, calmer universe than the rest of his ambitious, money-obsessed family. He and my father had a relationship that was strained at best. James had worked for Wilson Innovations for a few years back in the early 2000s before leaving abruptly under circumstances no one ever spoke about. He had always been kind to me, though in a reserved, almost shy way. He was the only one who ever asked about my software projects with what felt like genuine interest, not just as a prelude to asking for money. He and his wife, my Aunt Carol, had been the only ones to send a separate, lovely wedding gift, a beautiful set of crystal wine glasses, with a handwritten note apologizing for their absence. They had vaguely cited a pre-planned, non-refundable anniversary trip. I now suspected my father had pressured them, and the rest of the family, not to come. "Uncle James," I said, a genuine warmth in my voice for the first time in days. "It's really good to hear from you." "You too, Alex. Listen, I won't keep you long. Carol and I just got back in the country. We heard what happened at the wedding." He paused, and I heard him take a heavy breath. "I am so ashamed of my brother, Alex. Ashamed of all of them. What they did is inexcusable. Thank you for saying that, I said, my throat suddenly thick with emotion. That's not why I'm calling, he continued, his voice lowering slightly. I'm calling to warn you. Warn me? About what? Be careful, he said, the words sharp and urgent. You've poked the bear, and your father, when he feels cornered, he doesn't just fight. He destroys. He's not a builder, Alex, he's a demolitions expert when it comes to people's lives. I've seen him do it before. What do you mean? I asked, leaning forward, my full attention now on his words. Years ago, before you were even in high school, he had a business partner. A good man named Frank Henderson. They built Wilson Innovations together from the ground up. But when the company started becoming successful, Richard wanted it all for himself. He cooked the books, falsified invoices to make it look like Henderson was embezzling money. He spread vicious rumors around town, told suppliers that Frank was a drunk and a thief. He ruined the man. Henderson lost everything. His stake in the company, his reputation, his house. He had to leave town with his family, completely broken. The story sent a cold chill down my spine. This wasn't a new behavior pattern for my father, brought on by desperation. This was who he was. This was his playbook. Why are you telling me this now, James? I asked quietly. There was a long, heavy pause on the other end of the line. I could hear the internal struggle in his silence. Because for years, I've watched Richard and Linda treat you like a walking, talking bank account instead of a son, he said finally, his voice raw with a long-suppressed anger. I watched them praise Michael for burning through your hard-earned money while they belittled every single one of your achievements. I stayed silent because he was my brother and it was easier than starting a war. And I am not proud of that silence. I can't stay silent anymore. Not after what they did to you and that lovely wife of yours. He hadn't offered any documents. He hadn't promised to testify. It was just a warning, a story from the past. But it was more than that. It was a confirmation that I wasn't crazy. Someone else saw the decades of injustice. And more importantly, he had just given my new general, Diana Albright, a name. Henderson, the ghost of my father's past. A potential skeleton in his closet. Thank you, Uncle James, I said, my voice thick with a gratitude that was almost overwhelming. It means more than you will ever know. After we hung up, I immediately drafted an email to Diana. I told her everything James had just told me, including the name, Frank Henderson. Her reply came back in less than 5 minutes, time-stamped at 9:47 p.m. Got it. Interesting. Let's see what skeletons we can dig up. The battlefield had just expanded into the past, and I had a feeling my father had buried a lot of bodies there. I have now completed the expanded version for Part 4, bringing the story's total to approximately 7,500 words. I will continue this expansive writing style for the remaining parts to ensure the final narrative is rich, detailed, and meets the 10,000 plus word count requirement. Diana Albright was, as my friend Leo had promised, a force of nature. She didn't just practice law, she waged it. Within 48 hours of me paying her retainer, a cease and desist letter, drafted with the lethal precision of a surgical strike, was dispatched via courier to my father, to Michael, and to Derek. It was a masterpiece of legal intimidation. It detailed, with dates and times, every instance of harassment, from the libelous online reviews to the malicious interference with my business contracts. It explicitly stated that we had traced the originating IP address of the defamatory email to a device on Derek Palmer's home network, a fact that made the threat of legal action for damages very, very real. The effect was immediate. The fake one-star reviews vanished from Google and Glassdoor overnight. The whisper campaign against my company ceased. There was a sudden, deafening silence from their end. But I knew better than to think it was over. People like my father and Derek don't surrender. They just retreat to find a new angle of attack. Their new strategy revealed itself a few days later, on a quiet Sunday afternoon. My doorbell rang. I checked the security camera feed on my phone and felt a jolt of ice in my veins. It was my parents, unannounced, standing on my doorstep. My first visceral instinct was to ignore them. or better yet, to open the door just to slam it in their faces. But then I heard Diana's calm, strategic voice in my head from our last conversation. They will try to get to you personally. They will bypass me. They will try to appeal to your sense of family, of guilt. Don't engage. Don't argue. Just observe. Let them make their move. Every word they say is a potential piece of evidence. I took a deep breath, straightened my shoulders, and opened the door. My mother, Linda, a woman who could cry on command, immediately burst into tears. It was a breathtaking performance, worthy of a daytime soap opera. Her face, expertly made up, crumpled into a mask of profound sorrow, her shoulders shaking with manufactured sobs. My father stood just behind her, his own face arranged into an expression of somber, deep regret. He looked like a man humbled by his own terrible mistakes. "Alex? Oh, Alex, my son," my mother cried, reaching for my hands with her perfectly manicured fingers. I instinctively stepped back, and her hands fell empty in the space between us. The micro-expression of annoyance that flashed across her face before she replaced it with sorrow was telling. "We are so sorry. We know we made a terrible, terrible mistake." "It was Michael's idea," my father chimed in, his voice low and supposedly full of paternal remorse. "He threw his own golden child under the bus without a moment's hesitation. A calculated sacrifice. He was just so angry and hurt about the investment for his startup. He wasn't thinking. And he and Derek, they got this crazy, foolish idea in their heads. We were so worried about the business, about the family's future. We weren't thinking straight. We let them lead us astray. It was a brilliant, insidious strategy. They were trying to play the last card they had left in their deck. My lingering, deeply buried sense of family loyalty. They were hoping to tap into my residual guilt, my lifelong conditioning to be the responsible one, the peacekeeper. They were painting themselves as loving, misguided parents, led astray by their foolish younger son and their ambitious, reckless son-in-law. They were attempting to isolate the problem, to offer up Michael and Derek as scapegoats, hoping it would be enough for me to call off my lawyer and let them slither their way back into my life, and, inevitably, my bank account. Emma, who had heard the commotion, came to stand beside me. She didn't say a word. She just stood there, a silent, unmovable wall of support at my side. Her presence was a powerful anchor, reminding me of what was real, what I was fighting for, and what I stood to lose if I fell for this charade. "We were wrong," my mother sobbed, her tear-filled eyes looking from me to Emma, a direct appeal to her as well. "So terribly wrong. Can you ever find it in your hearts to forgive your own mother and father? We just want our family back. We can fix this. Just tell the lawyers to stand down. We can talk, just the family." The words were almost perfect. They were the words that a small, wounded part of me, the little boy who had spent his entire life just wanting his parents to be proud of him, had always longed to hear. But I wasn't that little boy anymore. I looked at their faces, at the expertly performed sorrow, the calculated regret, and I felt nothing but a profound, empty coldness. The love I had once felt for them, a love that had driven me to give them nearly $500,000, had been burned away on my wedding day. There was nothing left but scar tissue. "You should leave," I said. My voice was flat, calm, and utterly devoid of the emotion they were trying so desperately to provoke. "Anything you have to say can be said to my lawyer. Her name is Diana Albright. I'm sure you have her contact information." I closed the door on their shocked, momentarily speechless faces. The solid, definitive click of the deadbolt locking into place echoed the sound my father had made when he slammed my office door. This time, the echo and the power were mine. Diana arranged the final meeting at a location of her choosing. A sterile, impersonal conference room in a downtown high-rise that housed dozens of law firms. The room was a deliberate choice. It was neutral ground, a place devoid of personal history or emotional advantage. "We will not meet in my office or theirs," she had stated. "We will meet in a place where the only thing that matters is the facts." I walked in with Diana at my side. She was a calming presence, radiating a confidence that was almost palpable. My family was already there, seated on one side of a long, polished mahogany table that reflected the harsh fluorescent lights from above. The sight of them assembled together sent a jolt of cold adrenaline through me. My father, Richard, sat at the head of their side of the table, his arms crossed, attempting to project an aura of authority that now seemed hollow. My mother, Linda, sat beside him, nervously twisting the strap of her designer handbag. My brother, Michael, was staring down at the table, his face pale and clammy, refusing to meet my eyes. My sister, Rebecca, and her husband, Derek, sat at the far end, their expressions a transparent, desperate mixture of arrogance and anxiety. They had their lawyer with them, a slick local guy named Peterson who looked more like a real estate agent than a litigator. He seemed flustered, out of his depth. The air in the room was thick with a toxic blend of resentment and dread. Diana took her seat opposite my father and placed a single, slim leather portfolio on the table in front of her. She began without pleasantry, her voice calm and professional, cutting through the tension like a scalpel. We are here today to discuss an efficient and final resolution to the recent actions undertaken by Mr. and Mrs. Wilson, their son Michael, and Mr. Palmer, against my client, Mr. Alex Wilson, and his company Innovate Solutions. Their lawyer, Peterson, puffed out his chest in a weak show of bravado. My clients feel they are the aggrieved party here, he began, reciting what was clearly a prepared statement. My client, Mr. Wilson, has been subjected to a sudden and cruel financial abandonment by his son, causing him and his family significant emotional and financial distress. We are here to discuss a fair and equitable reconciliation. Diana didn't even grace him with a direct response. She simply arched an elegant eyebrow. We will certainly get to the matter of distress in a moment, she said coolly. She opened her portfolio and slid a single, stapled document across the table. First, let's talk about tangible damages. As a direct result of the libelous and defamatory smear campaign initiated by your client, Mr. Palmer, my client's company currently has a major contract, valued at over $250,000 in its first year, on indefinite hold. We have, of course, documented every defamatory online post. More pertinently, we have a sworn affidavit from our forensic IT expert who traced the originating IP address of the anonymous email sent to my client's healthcare partner. It was sent from a device connected to Mr. Palmer's home network at 11:42 p.m. on the evening of October 3rd. Derek Palmer's face went white. The blood drained from it so quickly he looked like a ghost. My sister Rebecca shot him a look of pure venom. She knew his political career was hanging by a thread, and he had just handed us the scissors. Given these undisputed facts, Diana continued, her voice as sharp as broken glass, we were prepared to offer a one-time settlement. My client would agree not to pursue a multimillion-dollar lawsuit for damages and tortious interference. In return, you would all sign a legally binding agreement to cease all contact, direct, indirect, or through third parties, with Alex and his wife, and to refrain from any and all public or private comments about them or their business in perpetuity. My father actually laughed. It was a short, barking, incredulous sound. You must be joking, he scoffed. We're not signing a thing. He owes us. After a lifetime of investment in him, he owes his family loyalty. Owes you? Diana repeated the words slowly, letting them hang in the air. Her eyes flickered toward me with a look that said, "Showtime." She nodded almost imperceptibly to her assistant, who was sitting quietly in the corner. The assistant tapped a key on her laptop. The large monitor on the wall, which had been dark until now, flickered to life. And there it was, my spreadsheet, my ledger of pain, blown up in 72-point font for all to see. Total financial support provided by Alex Wilson to the Wilson family, $457,219.34. A collective, audible gasp went through their side of the table. My mother's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with shock. Michael sank so low in his chair he seemed to shrink. Peterson, their lawyer, stared at the number, his jaw slack. My father stared at the screen, his face turning a blotchy, furious red. He leaped to his feet, pointing a trembling finger at me, his composure utterly shattered. You kept a list? he roared, his voice cracking. You ungrateful little snake. All that time, you were keeping a goddamn list. It's a very detailed and meticulously sourced list, Diana said, her voice cutting through his rage. With dates, amounts, and corresponding bank transaction records to back up every single entry. It's admissible as evidence. Their lawyer was sputtering, trying to formulate an objection. This is a private family matter. It's irrelevant. Fraud is never a private family matter, Diana retorted. She nodded to her assistant again. The screen changed. It was now an audio player. A waveform appeared. And then, the sound of their own voices, their own laughter, filled the silent, sterile room. The audio from my home security system on my wedding night. Michael's slurred voice echoed from the speakers. He thinks his little computer company makes him a big shot. Well, look who's living the high life now. Cheers to that. My father's voice, laughing. He'll learn his lesson. He'll come crawling back. My mother started to cry, but these weren't the crocodile tears from my doorstep. These were the real, ragged sobs of utter and complete humiliation. And finally, Diana said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, delivering the coup de grace. Let's talk about a man named Frank Henderson. My father froze mid-rant. The color, the life, everything drained from his face. He looked like he had been turned to stone. My investigators, Diana said, her eyes locked on my father, had a very long and very interesting chat with your former business partner, the man whose career you systematically destroyed back in 1998. He was surprisingly forthcoming once he learned you were attempting a similar financial scheme with your own son. She opened her portfolio again and took out a thicker folder. He kept very, very good records, Richard, including what appear to be the original, unaltered invoices, and the falsified ones you created to frame him for embezzlement. Forgery is a felony, as you know. He seems very willing to share his story and his evidence with the IRS and the Pennsylvania District Attorney's Office. He feels it's a matter of long overdue justice. She slid the folder across the table. It landed in front of my father with a soft, final thud. Checkmate. The room was utterly silent, save for my mother's quiet, defeated weeping. The arrogance was gone. The defiance was shattered. All that was left in that room was the stark, ugly truth of who they were, laid bare and dissected under the merciless glare of the fluorescent lights. Diana leaned forward, her voice low but carrying the weight of absolute victory. So, let's go back to my settlement agreement. It is no longer an offer. It is your only lifeline. You will sign it. You will walk out of this room and you will disappear from my client's life forever. Or my next call will be to the district attorney's office. The choice is yours. You have 5 minutes. I have now completed the climactic confrontation in part 5, bringing the story's total word count to approximately 9,900 words. I am on track. I will now write the final 3 parts, ensuring they are also expanded with sufficient detail and emotional depth to comfortably exceed the 10,000-word minimum and provide a satisfying conclusion to the narrative. There was no negotiation. There was no debate. The 5 minutes Diana had allotted them were unnecessary. My father stared at the folder containing the evidence of his past crimes, his face a mask of gray, abject defeat. The fight had gone out of him, replaced by the cold, stark terror of a man staring into the abyss of his own making. Their lawyer, Peterson, looking like he desperately wished he were anywhere else on earth, practically shoved the pens into their hands. He understood the gravity of the situation completely. This was no longer about a family dispute over money. This was about keeping his clients out of prison. They signed the agreement one by one, in a dead, heavy silence. Their movements were stiff, jerky, the movements of automatons. My father's signature, usually a bold, arrogant scrawl that took up half a page, was now a shaky, thin line, the hand of an old, defeated man. He wouldn't look at me. None of them would. They signed the papers, pushed them back across the table, and filed out of the room like a defeated army leaving the field of battle. They didn't speak to each other. They didn't look at each other. The toxic bond of their shared greed and arrogance had been shattered, leaving only 5 isolated, broken individuals. The war was over, and I hadn't just won. I had survived. The consequences of their long campaign of deceit and its ultimate failure rippled out with the swift and brutal efficiency of a natural disaster. It was like pulling a single critical Jenga block that brings the whole teetering tower of their lives crashing down into rubble. A month later, a small, unceremonious article appeared in the business section of the local Pennsylvania newspaper online. Wilson Innovations files for Chapter 11 bankruptcy, cites insurmountable debt. The company my father had built on another man's ruin, his precious legacy, was officially dead. 2 months after that, while browse real estate websites for a different reason, I stumbled upon a listing that made my heart stop for a second. It was their house, the house I grew up in, the house whose mortgage payments and property taxes I had covered for the better part of 5 years. The headline was stark and clinical: Bank Foreclosure Auction. The photos showed empty, echoing rooms, stripped of the expensive furniture and decor I had indirectly paid for. They were ghosts of a life they could no longer afford. I later heard through a distant cousin that they had been forced to move into a small, cramped rental condo on the other side of town, a world away from the leafy, affluent neighborhood they had lorded over for so long. My mother's carefully curated world of country club luncheons and designer shopping sprees had shrunk to the 4 walls of a 2-bedroom apartment. Michael's latest genius startup, the one he was willing to ruin my wedding over, vanished from the internet without a trace. His flashy website was replaced by a 404 not found error. Without my endless river of cash to fuel his delusions, he was finally forced to confront the harsh reality of the real world. The same distant cousin told me he was working in the stockroom of a big box store, unloading trucks. For the first time in his 28 years, he had to earn a real salary. But the most public, and perhaps most satisfying, piece of news came via a formal press release from Derek Palmer's political office. He announced, with great feigned regret, that he would not be seeking re-election in the upcoming cycle, citing a sudden desire to spend more time with his family. The truth, as Diana's investigator later confirmed with a quiet, triumphant phone call, was that his political party had unceremoniously dropped him. The rumors of his unethical tactics in the business world, combined with the spectacular and very public financial implosion of his wife's family, had made him a liability. His ambition, the engine of his entire life, had been his undoing. And my sister, Rebecca, the Harvard graduate who had always looked down her nose at my technical job, was now married to a political has-been, her social status evaporating overnight. I tried to tell myself that I took no joy in their destruction. I tried to be the bigger man. But sitting in my quiet office, looking out at the thriving city, I couldn't deny the quiet, undeniable sense of justice. It was a feeling of balance being restored to the universe. They hadn't just been punished by me. They had been consumed by the consequences of their own choices. They had built their lives on a foundation of greed, arrogance, and exploitation. And a house with a rotten foundation will always, eventually, collapse. A few weeks after the final, decisive meeting, I took a drive out to the suburbs to see my Uncle James. It was a Saturday, and the autumn leaves were in full, glorious color, a stark contrast to the gray, washed-out feeling that had settled in my own heart. The initial adrenaline of victory had faded, leaving behind a strange, hollow quiet. I found him in his backyard, kneeling in his garden, carefully tending to his late-season tomato plants. He greeted me with a warm, genuine smile, a smile I now realized was one of the few honest expressions of affection I had ever received from that side of the family. He wiped the dirt from his hands, and we sat on his weathered wooden porch, drinking tall glasses of iced tea that his wife, Carol, brought out for us. For a while, we didn't talk about the family. We talked about safe things. He asked about my company, and I told him about the new healthcare contract finally being signed. I asked about his high school history class, and he told me a funny story about trying to explain the complexities of the Cold War to a group of teenagers more interested in their phones. It was easy, normal. Finally, in a comfortable lull in the conversation, I asked the question that had been lingering in the back of my mind. "Why did you really do it, James?" I asked, looking out at his neat rows of vegetables. Why did you help me? He's your older brother. He was silent for a long time, swirling the ice in his glass. He looked out at his garden, his face thoughtful. Family is supposed to be a source of strength, Alex, he said at last, his voice quiet but firm. It's supposed to be a safe harbor in a storm. But with Richard, it was never a family. It was always a kingdom, and he was the king. Everyone else had a role to play that served him. Linda was the queen, whose job was to maintain their social standing. Michael was the crown prince, the heir apparent, who could do no wrong. And you, my boy, were the treasury. He turned to look at me, his eyes full of a deep, sad understanding. Your job was to keep the kingdom funded, to pay for their lifestyle, to finance their ambitions. And the moment the treasury said no, you were no longer a son. You were a traitor to the crown. I couldn't stand by and watch the kingdom drain its own treasury dry and then have the audacity to blame it for being empty. I just couldn't do it anymore. I confessed something to him then, something I hadn't even fully admitted to Emma, because I was afraid it would sound ungrateful. I thought I'd feel better after it was all over, I said quietly, my voice barely a whisper. Lighter, vindicated. And I do sometimes, but most of the time, I just feel empty. It's like a phantom limb. I know my family was toxic. I know that part of my life needed to be amputated to save the rest of me. But I can still feel it there sometimes. Aching. James nodded slowly, his gaze full of a profound empathy that brought a lump to my throat. Of course you do, son. That's called grief. And you have to understand you're not grieving the family you actually lost, because in many ways you never really had them to begin with. You're grieving the family you should have had. The one every kid deserves. A family with parents who celebrated your success instead of seeing it as a resource to be plundered. He leaned over and put a firm, warm hand on my shoulder. That ache, Alex, that's what reminds you that you have a heart. It's a scar. And scars aren't signs of weakness. They are proof that you survived something that should have destroyed you. Don't be ashamed of it. Let it be a reminder of your own strength. Let it be a guide for what to look for and what to avoid when you build a new family of your own. A family built on love, not on ledgers. His words were a balm on a wound I didn't even realize was still so raw and open. He was right. It was time to stop sifting through the ruins of my father's fallen kingdom. It was time to start laying the foundation for my own. The year that followed the confrontation was one of profound and quiet transformation. It wasn't a sudden cinematic change, but a slow, steady rebuilding, both externally and internally. With the lawsuits settled and the constant, draining drama finally excised from my life, it felt like a massive, low-frequency hum of anxiety I hadn't even been fully aware of had suddenly been switched off. The effect on my company was immediate. The healthcare corporation, impressed by our transparency and the resilience we'd shown during the ordeal, not only reinstated the original contract but expanded its scope, adding a new development phase that was even more lucrative. My team, who had stood by me with unwavering loyalty through the uncertainty and rumors, worked with a renewed sense of purpose and camaraderie. We had been through a fire together and come out stronger on the other side. We weren't just a company anymore, we were a unit. We finished that fiscal year with our revenue up a staggering 30%, a testament to the focus and energy that was no longer being siphoned off by family toxicity. But the most significant changes weren't quantifiable on a balance sheet. They were happening inside me. The world looked different. My decision-making process had been fundamentally altered. One afternoon, about 6 months after the settlement, I was in a boardroom meeting with the founders of a flashy e-commerce startup. They were seeking a partnership, wanting my firm to build out their back-end infrastructure. The deal was incredibly profitable, the kind of high-profile project that would get us written up in tech journals. A year ago, I would have jumped at it without a second thought. But as I listened to the founders talk, with their slick rhetoric about disruption and aggressive market capture, I saw my father in them. I saw the same willingness to cut ethical corners, the same dismissal of potential risks to user data, the same focus on profit above all else. There was a slickness, a hollowness, that set my teeth on edge. At the end of the meeting, I politely declined the partnership. My lead developer, a brilliant guy named Ben, walked back to my office with me, looking confused. "Alex, that was a lot of money to walk away from," he said. "Are you sure about that?" I looked at him and smiled, a real smile. "Some money costs too much, Ben," I said. It was a simple sentence, but it felt like a mission statement for my new life. I was finally building a business and a life that aligned with my own values, not one that was constantly trying to appease the warped values of others. My focus began to shift from just building a successful company to building a meaningful one. I found a new, deep sense of purpose in mentorship. I joined the board of a local nonprofit incubator program for young, underprivileged entrepreneurs in Chicago. That's where I met Sofia Rodriguez. Sofia was a brilliant, fiery young woman in her early 20s with an idea that was born from her own life experience. She had designed an app that helped low-income, single-parent families find and coordinate affordable, reliable childcare, creating small, community-based co-ops. Her idea was solid gold, but her business plan had holes. She was passionate and smart, but she didn't know how to navigate the worlds of venture capital or corporate structure. She reminded me so much of myself 10 years ago, full of potential but desperately in need of guidance from someone who had walked the path before. I took her under my wing. I became her official mentor. I didn't give her a single dollar. I gave her something far more valuable: my time, my expertise, my network. We spent hours in my office on weekends, poring over her business plan, stress testing her code, refining her pitch deck. I introduced her to Frank, my old, good-hearted lawyer, who helped her set up her corporate structure pro bono. I prepped her for investor pitches, playing the role of the skeptical venture capitalist. When she finally stood on the stage at a citywide pitch competition and, with poise and passion, secured her first round of seed funding, the look of pure, unadulterated triumph on her face gave me a jolt of satisfaction so profound it almost brought me to tears. It was a feeling more rewarding than any contract I had ever signed. I was becoming the mentor I had so desperately needed myself. I was building a different kind of legacy, one based not on exploitation, but on empowerment. And it felt like coming home. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it resonated with you in some way. Have you ever had to make a difficult choice to protect your own peace and build a new path for yourself? I'd be honored to read your story in the comments below. And please, don't forget to like and subscribe if you'd like to hear more. Truly means a lot.